Okay, so today I thought I would just do a quick video on cheesecake since I happen to be making cheesecake today. This is my New York style cheesecake recipe. This is actually a recipe I used at Sweet at my restaurant and bakery for years. You can either do a 10-inch, a 9-inch, or you could do these as smaller individual ones. I'm going to use a 9-inch today. It's going to make a really nice thick cheesecake. And we are going to be doing a water bath. So the first thing that you want to do is we want to take our springform pan and put it on some foil, and I'm just going to wrap the whole thing in foil. This is just a little extra insurance because we're putting it in the water bath to make sure we don't get any water seeping up inside the seam of our cheesecake, of our springform pan. So we're just going to get this set aside. I'm just going to put that to the side. The other thing I have for my setup is you want another pan, a roasting pan or something that's bigger than your springform. You can set it inside it because we're going to want to use a water bath to cook this. Using a hot water bath is the trick to having a really nice even cheesecake that bakes evenly and doesn't crack. So first thing we're going to get started with is our crust. So today I'm using cookie crumbs. You can use cookie crumbs. You can use shortbread, graham crackers, gluten-free Oreos, whatever kind of cookie crumbs you like. Ginger snaps this time of year are really great. And then I'm adding 3 tablespoons. I'm using maple sugar today. And then I'm going to add in my butter, which I'm actually just going to melt this for a second, and then we'll add the butter right in. All right, so while my butter's melting, I'm just going to mix together my crumbs with my maple sugar. You can use brown sugar, granulated sugar. You also could use any granulated sweetener you want. So if you want to make this no added sugar, you could use allulose would be my choice for one of the no-calorie sugars. Personally, I like to use maple sugar for something that's lower glycemic and less processed than regular sugar, or sometimes I'll mix allulose with maple sugar. But cheesecake is one of the recipes that's actually really easy to adapt to being sugar-free because it's not relying on the sugar for structure. So we can replace the sugar both in the crust and in the cheesecake filling with, again, allulose or Splenda or something like that you want to use. Allulose, again, would be my first choice. You just grab my butter. All right, so in goes my melted butter. I'm just going to mix this up, kind of like, till it should be like wet sand. And again, you can get creative and use any kind of cookie crumbs you like. Another thing that you can do for cheesecakes, you can get really creative with the crust, is if you have an extra cake layer lying around that happens to be 9-inch, 10-inch, whatever size you're using, you can actually press that into the bottom of your pan and bake your cheesecake right on top of it. It's delicious if you do like carrot cake on the bottom of it or black bottom with a chocolate cake. Cheesecake's very forgiving and easy to be creative with. So now I'm just going to put my cookie crumbs right into my springform. You get in there with your hands, or if you have a glass or a measuring cup or something, that's great to use. Try to spread them out fairly evenly before you press. Get them fairly even on the bottom of your pan, and then you're just going to press your crumbs to the bottom. Mine's starting to stick to the bottom of this glass a little bit. So when that happens, you just want to grab a little bit of spray. This is actually ghee and olive oil spray, which is pretty cool. And you're just going to press it in. Mine still wants to stick, so I'm just going to get my hands in there now that I have it mostly packed and even. I like to have mine go up the sides of the pan a little bit to cover where that crack is on the edge of your springform pan. This makes a good little, maybe 1/4 inch or a little bit thicker crust. If you want more crust or you want to go higher up the sides, you could, do like a 1.5 times or something in the crust. I find this perfect. I often also like to do another great thing to do for crust is to take sugar cookie or shortbread dough and roll it out or pat it right into the bottom of your pan, bake it off, and then make your cheesecake on top of that. That's also delicious. So now that our crust is all inside of our pan, I'm just going to take this and pop it into a 375-degree oven for 10 minutes for the crust to set. And while it's setting, we're going to go ahead and make the cheesecake batter. Okay, so for our New York cheesecake batter, I'm using my stand mixer today. You can use a handheld mixer if you like. We're going to start off by putting our cream cheese in. So again, this makes a really thick, a nice thicker cream cheese. It's a little bit larger batch than some of the ones you typically see like on the back of the cheesecake box. So I'm starting off with 5 packages of cream cheese, or 2.5 pounds of cream cheese. And it should be like room temperature soft. Just makes it easier to get it really smooth and mix well. And we're going to start that on the mixer just to start it mixing, make sure it's nice and smooth. We don't have a lot of lumps before we start to add other things to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix with the paddle attachment. When you're making cheesecake, one of the things that's really important to remember is to scrape it down often so you don't end up with many lumps of cream cheese. We want everything really well mixed together. So once the cream cheese is just, it's fairly softened up and mixed together, I don't go too long, because if it gets too soft, like mayonnaise-y, then it's going to be hard to get your sugar and everything evenly dispersed. I like it to be a little bit thick still, a little bit, it's like room temperature. You can squeeze it, not room temperature, like mayonnaise or sour cream. You want it to still have a little bit of texture to it, because having that texture, a little bit of firmness, helps give some friction when you mix in your sugar and your other things to help everything mix in really evenly. So again, I'm using maple sugar. So this is going to be a maple flavored cheesecake. And I'm just going to start to mix the sugar in. And I'm going to let this mix until the sugar's really well mixed and the cream cheese looks nice and smooth and I don't see any streaks of white or chunks of cream cheese. You're going to mix it like on a medium-low speed. And again, I'll stop to scrape down a few times. So I can see there's a whole bunch of sugar kind of on the very bottom of my bowl and the cream cheese around the sides and around my paddle. So I'm going to stop and scrape, and I'm going to scrape the sides down first, and then I'll scrape off the paddle. Again, you can't scrape too much with almost anything, but especially cheesecake, because you don't want any big streaks of just cheese that aren't mixed in with everything else. I am a purist when it comes to cheesecake, like a little maple flavor or flavor extracts, things like that in my cheesecake. I don't mind, but I actually don't love it when flavorings like cherry and pumpkin and things like that are added in, because they do change the texture of it. And I know lots of people love it, but I love the texture of just a pure, like a New York cheesecake. And the New York style is a little bit of that real thick, rich cheesecake. And then I love to put things on top of it. So I'm going to keep this mixing. One of my favorite things to put on top of cheesecake this time of year is homemade cranberry sauce. It is so delicious, like a little sour, sweet, tangy. I do have a recipe for a homemade cranberry sauce on my website that is so delicious on cheesecake. We used to serve it that way in the restaurant this time of year, and would be great with any of the cookie crust or even a nut crust, like an almond crust would be delicious with that, or pecans. I'm just going to turn this up and get it really well mixed. Okay, so I'm not seeing any streaks really, and you can see the color of it. This is because I'm using maple sugar. You actually could use brown sugar if you wanted. That would be delicious too. Or, keep it very traditional and use your regular old granulated white sugar. Okay, so now that is looking good, I see a little bit of white there, but it's not thick. It's the same consistency, so it's all going to mix in. There's no chunks. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my flour. So I just have 30 grams or 3 tablespoons of gluten-free 1-to-1 flour. With it mixing, I'm just going to sprinkle that in again so it gets evenly incorporated. And I'm just going to add a pinch of salt. A pinch of salt in sweet things just always kind of brightens it up, brings out all your flavors. I'm going to stop and scrape again, and then we're going to add in our eggs kind of one at a time. I have them all cracked into the same container, but kind of at the speed of, let one drop at a time. So I have 5 eggs plus 2 egg yolks, and those extra 2 egg yolks are just for a little bit of extra richness. Cheesecake is supposed to be rich and decadent. So now with it mixed, with it running, I'm just going to slowly add. So I got 1 egg in, and I'll wait for that one to incorporate, because if you add them too fast, it's going to separate, and then you're going to have to mix it for a really long time to get everything to come back together again and be nice and emulsified. So you really want to take your time, resist the urge to rush, and put them in one at a time. And again, while you're doing this, if you notice stuff clinging to the sides, not completely mixing in, you can stop it. I'm just going to give a little scrape just down the sides before I add my next couple of eggs, since I have a few in. And back we go. So I'll drop one more in. While my eggs are mixing in, I'm just going to put a little bit of zest. This is my heavy cream. I'm going to zest right into it. So you can use the zest or you can leave it out, but a little bit of, I love a little bit of lemon and a little bit of orange. It gives that, a lot of New York bakeries or Italian bakeries in New York will have this flavor that you're like, what's that flavor? I used to call it bakery flavor, and it's the combination of lemon, orange, vanilla, sometimes lemon, orange, vanilla, and butter. It's very subtle. So I didn't have an orange today, but I have these calamansi limes. I actually have a tree, an indoor tree that's really cool. And they taste a lot like orange. So I'm just using a little bit of that because I don't have an orange. And just a little bit. Like if you don't want it to taste like a citrus cheesecake, just do, you know, a half a teaspoon or something. Or if it's the first time you're making it, you're not sure, go light with it. You can always add more the next time. I don't want it to taste like a lemon or orange cheesecake. I just want that faint little extra flavor in there that just kind of boosts the vanilla and it all works together. I already have my vanilla added into my cream as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add another egg. You can see I'm not whipping it super high. I don't want all kinds of extra air in this. Again, New York style cheesecake, there's different styles of cheesecakes. New York style is that style that tends to be a little bit denser and like really rich and creamy. Some cheesecake recipes you'll see that have the egg whites whipped separately and folded in, or if you were to excessively beat this, wouldn't quite be the same. But when you fold in the egg whites, then you get those big, really super fluffy cheesecakes. It's just a different style of cheesecake. I love New York cheesecake, but I can only eat a sliver because it's so rich. You just eat a little piece. And again, having it with some sort of like nice bright berries or something a little bit sweet and tart as a topping helps to cut through all that richness and is amazing. All right, last egg in. Okay, so my last egg's incorporated. So again, I'm just going to scrape down one more time, make sure we don't have anything that's too thick or not mixed in. If you happen to see like a chunk up on your paddle or something at this point, don't mix it in because you can see this is so loose and creamy now that if you put something in that was like a harder chunk, it probably wouldn't break up in your mixture and you'd have a lump. So I'm just going to put that back on again on medium low. Put in the last bit of our ingredients, our cream, vanilla, and zest. Just mix till this is well combined. So my crust is coming out of the oven. The crust that we blind baked is right here. It's coming out of the oven. And I have a pot of water on the stove that I've had on simmer because I want my water to be hot when we put it in the oven with the water bath. What that does is it helps it start cooking evenly from all sides, from the heat in the oven and then from the water touching the outside of it. It just helps to really evenly conduct that heat throughout the entire cheesecake, which helps to keep it from cracking. And it puts moisture into the oven, which also is helping to keep it from cracking. All right, so everything's mixed together here. And so here I have my pan. Now, I gotta remember not to touch it, it's hot. Set inside of a larger pan. You could you use a sheet pan? Yeah, I like to use something a little bit deeper though, because I want the water to go about an inch and a half up the side of my cheesecake pan. And if you use something not quite as deep, you're cutting it really close, it's hard to move it, or you have to pour the water in once it's already in the oven. And while this is baking, you're also going to want to check it and see how the water, if the water's evaporating off, and add more hot water to it because this cheesecake takes quite a while to bake. So I had the oven at 375 to bake off my crust. When you take your crust out, you want to drop that oven to 325 for us to bake the cheesecake at. So now I'm going to pour this in. And you can see that in a 9-inch pan, this recipe is going to come almost up to the top to give us a nice thick cheesecake. If you like it a little bit thinner, then go ahead and use a 10-inch pan. And we're just going to make sure this is all in. We don't want to waste any of that goodness. Smooth out my top evenly. There we go. All right, so last step is to carefully pour our water in. Now, depending on how far away your oven is from where you're putting this together, your strength, what pan you're using, you can take this to the oven, put it on the oven rack, and then pour the water in. I like to try to avoid that because the longer you leave your oven in, the oven temperature drops. So if you have a pan and you can handle it, but you also want to remember this is now going to get hot. So you're going to want oven mitts because I'm putting hot water in it. It's going to get pretty warm. So after I pour my water in, I'm going to use oven mitts to transfer this to the oven. So you're just going to carefully pour that water in, again, till it goes about an inch to an inch and a half up the sides. You want to make sure you have enough also, so again, it's not going to evaporate off in the oven too quickly. And then we'll check on it. So baking at 325, this is going to take about an hour and a half. I'm going to go pop this in the oven, and then I'll talk to you for a minute about how we know when it's done. Okay, so cheesecake's in the oven. It's going to take us about an hour and a half. You start looking at it and checking it. Around the hour mark, I like to look and see how it's looking. If it's getting browner than you would like on top, if it's nice and evenly brown, some people like a really nice caramelized brown top, that's fine. If you would like it to stay whiter and not have that brown top, and you start noticing it's getting a little more color than you would like, you can tent it with foil over the top for the last half hour of baking or so. When you're getting towards the end and you jiggle it, it's not really jiggling, but you're not quite sure if it's done. One surefire way to tell if your cheesecake is done is to use a probe thermometer, a digital probe thermometer. You're just going to insert that into the cheesecake, and when it registers 150 degrees, your cheesecake's done. If you go too much higher, 150 to 160, you're okay, 155. But if you go too much higher, I don't like to go above 155, then you can start to affect the texture, and it's not quite as creamy and delicious. So at 150, it is done, it comes out, and it will set. I also like to make my cheesecake a day ahead of time because I find they get better the longer they can sit and cool and then sit in the refrigerator overnight. So we'll come back and check it out when it comes out of the oven. Okay, so our cheesecake is out of the oven. I'm just going to peel off the foil. So I'm not going to take it out of the springform yet because we're going to let it cool in the springform pan, but I want you to see what it looks like. And again, mine's a little bit of this golden brown color, maybe more than it would be if I hadn't used maple sugar, because remember, it had that nice creamy light brown color to it when it went in the oven. But you can see it's really evenly baked. You can see a little hole there where I put the thermometer in to test it. That is our finished cheesecake. So now it's still quite warm. I'm going to leave it in the springform pan. What I'm going to do is just run a knife around the edge of my cheesecake. So while it cools, as it starts to shrink away from the sides of the pan, it doesn't crack or distort the top at all. So I'm just running a sharp knife right around the edge of the pan. And then I'm going to set this aside. I'm going to leave it out at room temperature till it cools off a little bit more because I don't want to put it in the oven and in the refrigerator. I don't want to put it in the refrigerator and bring the whole temperature of my refrigerator up. So I want this to cool at room temperature probably for about an hour because it's really good and hot. And then I'm going to wrap it when it's not steaming anymore. So I don't have to worry about condensation. I'll wrap it and put it in the refrigerator overnight. And then I'll come back and take it out and cut it. Okay, so it's been a day since we baked this beautiful cheesecake. It has been sitting in the fridge overnight to set up. I really believe cheesecake becomes more delicious and a nicer texture if you let it sit in the fridge overnight. So now we're just going to cut into it. And the little trick for cutting cheesecake is have yourself a nice pot or some sort of a container of really hot water. Dip your knife in the hot water and then wipe your blade off. And it's just going to go right through your cheesecake. And then you're going to wipe it off between each cut. And this gives you a beautiful, clean cut and makes it easier to get a perfect slice. And this works for cheesecakes, mousse cakes, really any kind of cake you like. So now let's take out and see our beautiful, rich, and luscious New York cheesecake. So I'm going to put that onto my plate and you can see. So you can top this any way you like. You can eat it plain if you're a cheesecake purist. I love to top this with cranberry sauce, a homemade cranberry compote, a little sugar, a little orange juice in it. Absolutely delicious. And I do have a recipe for that too, but you could top this with any type of fruit you like, or you could eat it just the way it is. I hope you try this recipe and I hope you love it. See you next time.